I remember the scent of the vanilla cake Mom baked that morning. She never cooked, not even on holidays, but on my 18th birthday she did. I should have known something was off then. They waited until the afternoon. I was still in my pajamas when Dad called me into the living room. He didn't even look at me. Mom was staring down at her lap, her lips tight. Something had happened. I felt it in my gut. "Sit down," Dad said. His voice had that same coldness he used whenever I spilled milk as a kid. I sat, confused, but trying to keep calm. I'd learned long ago not to show emotion around them. It made things worse. Then they dropped it. "You were adopted," Mom said bluntly. No emotion, no tears, just facts. "We took you in when you were 2, Dad added. "Your birth mother couldn't care for you. We did what we could." I was frozen. "We think it's time," Mom continued, "that you find your own way now. You're old enough." Then Dad reached under the couch and slid a small duffel bag across the carpet. "There's some money in there, and clothes. We've arranged for you to stay at a hostel until you find a job." They were kicking me out. On my birthday. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I stood up slowly and nodded. "Thank you," I said with a small smile. They didn't notice the way my fingers gripped the strap of the bag. They didn't notice the flicker of something sharper in my eyes. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that 3 weeks earlier I had found the letter. It was buried in the bottom drawer of the hallway cabinet, behind some old tax papers. An envelope addressed to a woman named Elena Vasilieva. But inside was a birth certificate, with my name and hers listed as mother. No father. I'd looked her up online. I'd even gone to the library to read old newspaper articles. And what I found shocked me so deeply, I hadn't spoken of it to anyone. Not yet. My real mother hadn't been unfit. She was taken away. And now, as I walked out the front door of the house where I had lived my whole life, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt ready. Because I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving with a plan. The hostel smelled like bleach and stale air, the kind of place people ended up when they ran out of places to go. I kept my back to the wall that first night, clutching my bag like it was worth something. Truth was, it only had 2 changes of clothes, a few wrinkled bills, and that envelope. The envelope was everything. The next morning, I slipped out before sunrise, the air sharp against my cheeks. I walked for an hour to the public library, my only real refuge. It was quiet there, safe, and they had the archives. I sat down at the microfilm station, slid in the reel I'd hidden in my locker last week, and kept reading the same yellowed article over and over, as if this time the ending would change. Local psychiatrist Elena Vasilyeva institutionalized after whistleblower claims backfire. The photo next to the headline showed a young woman with dark eyes and delicate features, being led away in handcuffs. Her expression wasn't scared. It was defiant. The article said she had accused a local doctor, Dr. Richard Halverson, of abuse and unethical experimentation on female patients at a now-defunct clinic. The doctor denied everything, of course. A month later, Elena was declared unstable and sent to Silver Birch Psychiatric Facility for treatment and observation. No charges filed against the doctor. No follow-up, just silence. Except that same doctor, he later became the head of the Halverson Wellness Foundation, a foundation my adoptive father had donated to, frequently. I'd remembered seeing the name on letters around the house, brushed off as charity work. Now it was starting to connect. I printed the article and tucked it into the envelope. The librarian looked at me funny, maybe because my hands were shaking. Back at the hostel, I opened my notebook and wrote down everything I knew. Elena was a practicing psychiatrist. She was institutionalized after trying to expose a powerful man. She gave birth to me during that time. Somehow, I ended up in the care of a couple connected to that same man. This wasn't coincidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows on the ceiling felt too alive, too close. I kept thinking about her, Elena. Did she know I was out here? Was she even alive? I needed answers. I needed to see her, speak to her if I could. But first, I had to find out where Silver Birch Psychiatric Facility was now, if it even still existed. The next morning, I began calling public records offices, mental health departments, anyone who might know where former patients were transferred after Silver Birch was shuttered. Most didn't even know it existed. But one clerk, an older woman with a soft voice, hesitated when I asked. She said she'd call me back. 2 hours later, she did. There's a long-term care center in Glenridge, about 3 hours north. Some of the Silver Birch patients were moved there quietly in the late 90s. No public list. But I can tell you, some of them are still there. I didn't ask how she knew. I just wrote the name down. Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health. I had a destination now, but no car, no money, and no idea what I would find. I hadn't eaten in a day. Not because I couldn't, but because I couldn't afford to. The wrinkled bills my adoptive parents gave me had nearly all gone to hostel fees and printing records. Every coin mattered now, even the ones stuck at the bottom of vending machines. I sat on the sidewalk near the library with my notebook in my lap, trying to work through the math. Bus fare to Glenridge wasn't much, but it might as well have been a plane ticket with what I had. I didn't want to steal. I didn't want to beg. But I did want answers. The diner across the street had a help wanted sign in the window. I hesitated, then crossed. I asked for the manager, told him I'd wash dishes, mop floors, anything. He looked me up and down, noticed the circles under my eyes, then said, "You start tomorrow 6 a.m." I worked for 5 days straight, barely speaking to anyone. My back ached, my hands bled from scalding water and cracked soap, but on the 6th morning, I pocketed $117 in tips and pay. It was enough. The bus to Glenridge left at 10:40 a.m. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked to the terminal, folded the envelope with Elena's article inside my jacket, and climbed on board. The ride was quiet, passing towns that looked nearly abandoned, their streets still covered in frost, though it was already April. Ridgeview Center sat at the top of a long hill, half hidden by trees. The sign was faded, the paint peeling. It looked less like a hospital and more like a forgotten mansion. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in. She had a clipboard, glasses perched low on her nose, and a tired voice. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, steadying my voice. "Name?" she asked. "Elena Vasilyeva." She blinked. "Relation?" I paused. "I'm her daughter." She raised her eyes, studying me for a moment. "She doesn't get visitors." "I know, that's why I'm here." She picked up the phone, dialed an internal line, murmured something too low to hear. Then she nodded at me. "Down the hallway, second door on the left, but keep it brief." The door creaked open like something out of a dream. And there she was. Thin, pale, hair streaked with gray. Sitting by a window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't turn when I entered. "Elena," I said, voice trembling now. She looked up slowly. Her eyes met mine. And for a second, just one, something flickered in them. Recognition, pain, maybe both. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. I stepped closer, heart hammering. "My name is Nora. You had a daughter 18 years ago. They told me you were unfit. They said you were dangerous. But I read what happened. I know what you tried to do. I know what they did to you." She exhaled softly, and something in her posture changed. Her hands clenched. "They still watch me," she whispered, almost too quiet to hear. "They think I don't remember, but I do." I froze. She remembered. But who was they? Elena's eyes darted toward the door, then to the corners of the ceiling. There were no cameras I could see, but she stared as if she knew exactly where they used to be. Her voice was barely above a breath when she spoke again. They recorded our therapy sessions, said it was for research, but it wasn't. It was to control us, to build profiles. I saw things, heard things I shouldn't have. She paused, gripping her thin wrist with her opposite hand, like she was holding herself back. Elna, I began, stepping closer. Who's they? Is it the Halverson Foundation? My father? She blinked rapidly, the name seeming to cause a physical reaction in her. She shook her head slowly, but not as a no. It was more like denial out of fear. Your father, she whispered, her eyes not meeting mine. He wasn't meant to adopt you. He wasn't even on the approved list. But he pulled strings, got your file closed, sealed. I tried to stop it. But by then, they had already decided I was too loud, too dangerous. My knees felt weak. I lowered myself into the chair beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. What were they doing, Elena? What did Halverson do to those women? She bit her lip until it turned white. Experimental therapy, isolation techniques, memory suppression trials. It started under the guise of PTSD treatments, but it evolved. They tested drugs, behavioral manipulation, on women no one would miss. Some were addicts, some were just inconvenient wives. And you? I asked. I was documenting everything. I was young, idealistic. I thought ethics mattered. I submitted a report to the state board. A week later, I was suspended, then arrested, then this place. Her voice cracked and her eyes welled. She hadn't cried in years, I could tell. She'd trained herself not to. I begged them to let me see you. When they told me you'd been placed, I didn't know where, or with whom. They moved me here, said I was a danger to myself. I never stopped wondering. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. You don't have to wonder anymore. She touched the folded papers like they might dissolve in her fingers. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, you shouldn't be here. If they know you found me. I don't care, I interrupted, firmer now. You're not crazy. You never were. And I'm going to prove it. Elena's hand shot out, gripping mine with sudden force. Don't trust anyone with a badge or a lab coat. Not in this world. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Elena's entire body stiffened. A shadow passed the door. She sat up straighter, eyes blank, posture perfect. The nurse opened the door, smiling thinly. I'm sorry, visiting hours are over. Elna didn't look at me again, just folded her hands and turned to the window. I stood, heart racing. As I passed the nurse, she leaned in slightly and whispered, You're not the first to come asking about her. But the last girl didn't come back. She shut the door behind me before I could respond. The cold hit me like a slap the moment I stepped out of Ridgeview. My breath fogged the air, and my fingertips trembled. Not just from the chill, but from everything I'd just heard. My mother wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner. I didn't go straight to the bus stop. I found a bench under a dead oak tree and sat there, staring at the faded sign of the center up the hill. My thoughts were racing. Another girl had come before me. Someone else had tried to uncover the truth, and she was gone. The nurse hadn't said it as a threat, but it felt like one. Back in Glenridge, I checked into a cheap motel with cracked wallpaper and a key that barely turned. I couldn't sleep. I spent the night combing online forums, deep archives, even Reddit threads, looking for anything about Ridgeview, Silver Birch, or patients who had disappeared without a trace. Nothing. It was like they'd scrubbed their history clean. I turned my attention to the Halverson Foundation. That name hadn't left me alone since I saw it on the donation letters in my adoptive father's study. Their website was polished, filled with smiling faces, wellness retreats, and carefully worded mission statements about holistic healing for women in crisis. A lie. A front. I started digging through nonprofit filings and tax documents, anything public. And then I saw it. A name, buried in the administrative paperwork. Thomas Brenner. He'd signed off on a foundation acquisition of patient care research materials during the year Silver Birch was shut down. My stomach dropped, because that's my adoptive father's real name. He was never just a donor. He was part of it, a director, one of the inner circle. He helped Halverson cover it all up. He may have even helped have Ilana committed. And then he took me. I was never a gift, never a charity case. I was a souvenir from their success. Proof that the system worked, that they could destroy someone's life and raise their child like nothing happened. Rage shook my body, but under it, a cold fear crept in. They had power, reach. They'd erased others before. That nurse at Ridgeview hadn't been warning me out of kindness. She was telling me to run, but I wasn't running. I needed proof. I searched public employee records for Ridgeview and found a name, Nurse Janet Keller. Same one I'd seen on the name tag. With some effort, I tracked her Facebook page. No posts, just likes and photos of her cat. But there was one clue, an old comment under a picture of a nursing conference. Someone had tagged her and said, "Still working nights at Ridgeview? Poor thing, that place is haunted." I messaged her. I didn't expect a response, but I told her who I was. Told her I spoke with Elena, and that I needed her help to expose what really happened. An hour passed, then 2. Then at 2:14 a.m., a message came in. "Meet me, back entrance, tomorrow night, midnight. But if anyone sees you, say you're lost." The wind was sharp that night, cutting through my jacket like it wasn't there. Midnight at Ridgeview felt different, like the building itself was holding its breath. There were no cars in the lot, no voices, just silence and shadows stretching under the moonlight. I followed the gravel path around the back, stepping over cracked stone and patches of frost. The door was marked "Maintenance Only." It creaked open before I could knock. Janet Keller stood inside, still in her scrubs, her expression taut and tired. Up close, she looked older than I expected. Not in years, but in weight, like she carried too many secrets for too long. "You came," she said. I nodded. I had to. She motioned me in. "Keep your voice low. Some of the cameras are broken, but not all." We moved quickly down a narrow service hallway lit by flickering bulbs. She led me through a small break room and into an old records room lined with filing cabinets. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, unlocking the third drawer down with a small brass key. "But I saw what they did to your mother, and to the others. And when that last girl showed up, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would finally listen." I froze. "The other girl, what happened to her?" Janet pulled a worn file from the cabinet and handed it to me. Her name was Claire Rothman, journalism student, bright, persistent. She came asking questions about Elena and others who had disappeared from Silver Birch. She showed me court documents she dug up, medical papers. She was close. What happened to her? She came back for a second visit. That night, her dorm was broken into. Her laptop, files, gone. She told her roommate she felt like she was being followed. 2 days later, she vanished. Police ruled it a voluntary disappearance. But you don't believe that? "No," Janet said softly. Claire was scared, but not the running kind. I opened Elena's file. Pages and pages of notes, all stamped with red. Unfit, delusional, paranoid. The language was clinical, cold, manipulated. "She wasn't delusional," Janet said. "She was sane. The day before her commitment, she filed a complaint with the medical board. The next day, she's labeled a threat." I flipped to a photocopied report, handwritten, signed E. Vasilyeva. It described unauthorized drug trials on patients with no legal consent, under the direction of Halverson. "Why hasn't this come out?" Janet shook her head. The foundation's reach is long. They fund hospitals, universities, even political campaigns. If you try to go through the system, they'll make you disappear too. I'm not going to the system, I said, folding the report and slipping it into my jacket. I'm going to burn their house down, from the outside. Janet hesitated, then reached into her own bag and handed me a flash drive. These are internal memos, scans of patient logs, Elena's reports. If you're serious, you'll need this. I am. Then be smart and don't come back here. As I left through the maintenance door, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just a girl looking for answers anymore. I was a threat. And I wasn't scared. Not yet. I didn't go back to the motel. I didn't go anywhere with my name on it. Instead, I spent the night in a corner booth of a 24-hour diner 2 towns away, nursing a cup of coffee I couldn't afford, and staring at the flash drive in my palm like it was a live wire. I had no laptop, just my phone. I couldn't risk connecting the drive to anything traceable. By noon, I found a second-hand electronics shop, paid cash for a beat-up Chromebook. I took it to a public library, sat at the back behind a shelf of forgotten biographies, and plugged the flash drive in. It took 3 minutes to load. Then the folder names appeared. Patient logs, experimental treatment notes, foundation memos, Dr. R.H., private, transfer records. E. Vasilyeva. My throat went dry. I opened the patient logs first. Pages of cold clinical notes, coded references to sedation trials, regression therapy, behavioral compliance sessions. Some notes ended with subject transferred to long-term containment after non-compliance. No names, just numbers. Next were the foundation memos. Many bore Thomas Brenner's digital signature. Patient EV remains a reputational threat. Recommend continued confinement and status quo. Possible media exposure in 2008 flagged. Handled. Internal report by Rothman suggests breach. Monitor and escalate. Claire's name. They knew she was digging. They watched her. They let her get close. Then they erased her. My hands shook as I opened the folder labeled DRRH Private. Video files. Dozens. No titles, just dates. I clicked one from 2005. A dim room. A woman strapped to a chair. Slurred speech. A man off-screen asking calm, leading questions. Do you believe we're here to hurt you, Elena? A familiar voice. Cold, smooth, Halverson. No, she murmured. You're helping me forget. I slammed the lid shut. It wasn't therapy. It was programming. I needed to move fast. I reached out to every independent journalist I could find. Reddit threads, anonymous leak forums. I even sent the full contents of the drive to a burner email connected to a podcast I once heard about whistleblowers. Most didn't reply. But one name caught my eye. Rachel Ashby, former investigative reporter. Fired years ago for pursuing a story on unethical psychiatric treatment in state-run facilities. Rumor was she kept digging, even off the grid. I sent her a message. I have proof of state-sanctioned experiments on women. I have names, videos. And I think a girl named Claire Rothman tried to reach you once. She disappeared. Please. Help me. I expected silence. But an hour later, she replied, Where are you? I've been waiting for this for 15 years. Rachel Ashby didn't live in a city. She lived in a small cabin on the edge of nowhere, 3 hours from the nearest Starbucks, and buried under pine trees thick as secrets. Her voice on the phone had been low, direct. No names. No license plates. Leave your phone in the glove box. I'll meet you outside. I followed every instruction. When I arrived, she was already waiting on the porch. Early 50s, sharp eyes, wind-worn skin. She didn't smile. Inside, she moved fast. No welcome, no tea. Just locked the door, pulled out a dusty laptop, and said, Show me. I handed her the flash drive. She plugged it in. No reaction as she scrolled through the folders, only a slow, deliberate breath when she saw the name Claire Rothman. She called me once, Rachel murmured. Told me she was scared. Told me she thought she was being followed. I offered to meet. She disappeared before we could. She paused a beat, looked at me. You're not just risking your life. You're stepping into a war these people think they already won. I know, I said, but I'm not backing down. She opened one of the memos and nodded. These are real. The language, the headers. This is how the Foundation writes. You couldn't fake this. Then she clicked into the videos. Watched, quiet, steady, jaw clenched. These go public. Someone burns, she said finally. But we have to be smart. One wrong move, and you disappear like Claire. Or worse, like Elena. Alive, but buried. She leaned closer, voice a whisper. We need to make this too big for them to contain. We go to trusted allies, former prosecutors, whistleblower networks. And when we drop it everywhere. At once. I nodded. But deep inside, I knew we weren't just fighting for the truth. We were fighting for Elena, for Claire, and for what was left of my own stolen life. Rachel moved fast. Within 24 hours, the flash drive had been duplicated 6 times and mailed to 6 people across the country. Former prosecutors, human rights lawyers, 2 podcasters, and an underground whistleblower platform. Each person received a separate password to unlock it, delivered over encrypted calls. This is how you kill a monster, Rachel said. Starve it of secrecy. Meanwhile, she drafted a comprehensive report to accompany the evidence, tying it all together. She worked through the night. I barely slept. But the next morning, I woke to a voicemail. It was from him, Thomas Brenner. His voice was steady, calm, the way it always had been, controlled, like he was already deciding what came next. Nora, I know what you've been doing. I want to talk. You owe me that. I stared at the phone. My stomach twisted. I didn't owe him anything. Rachel looked up from her laptop. Don't go. But I had to. I needed to look him in the eye. One last time. We met in a public place. An old train station, half abandoned. Cameras, witnesses. I kept my distance. He wore his usual beige coat and fatherly smile, like nothing had changed. You've grown into a clever girl, he said. Don't, I snapped. Don't pretend you raised me out of love. His face flickered. You think this was simple? You think I wanted this? No, I said. I think you wanted control. He paused, then gave a small nod. Everything you found. It's dangerous. Not just for me. For you. For Elna. If you release it, people will get hurt. I know, I said, eyes locked on his. And they already have. He stepped closer. This doesn't have to end badly. You still have time to stop it. I didn't move. Then I said quietly, It's already out. He went still. His face changed, calm peeled away, revealing something colder. This will destroy you too, he said. No, I whispered. It frees me. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. The news broke 2 days later. It started with a podcast episode, raw, unfiltered audio, from the videos Nora had recovered. Then came the articles, the documents, the scans of falsified patient files, whistleblower statements, an anonymous exposé on Claire Rothman, naming names. And then, the video. Elena, in that room. Her voice slurred, her eyes empty. People watched, people listened. By the end of the week, Silver Birch was trending. Within 10 days, the state attorney general announced a formal investigation. Subpoenas were issued. Thomas Brenner's name appeared alongside Richard Halverson and 3 others in a class action lawsuit filed by former patients' families. Nora hadn't expected the world to care, but it did. Rachel kept her protected, hidden while the media frenzy surged. But Nora's thoughts never left Ridgeview. I have to get her out, she told Rachel one morning, before they decide she's too dangerous to keep alive. Rachel made a call. By dusk, they were on the road. Ridgeview didn't resist. After the leak, the staff were scared, uncertain. Some had already left. Nurse Janet met them at the door and handed over a clipboard. She's been sedated, quietly, but she's still lucid. You need to move fast. Nora found her in the same chair by the window. Mom, she whispered, kneeling down. We're leaving. Elena's eyes were glassy, but her hand moved, slow but sure. She touched Nora's cheek. You found me. I always would, Nora said, tears brimming. No matter what they did. They walked out together. No alarms, no men in white coats. Just dusk light and wind. The next weeks were a blur. Legal protection, medical care, trauma therapy. Elena's reintroduction to a world that had forgotten her. And the trial? Postponed. Delayed. But not dismissed. Thomas Brenner never called again. He was indicted 3 months later. And Claire? Rachel kept digging. 6 months after the leak, a woman was found living under a false name in a small town in Oregon. Nervous, guarded, but alive. Her name was Claire Rothman. Nora flew out to meet her. They spoke for hours, not about what was lost, but about what they were going to build. Together.